take a slow breath in and let it go. This is not a story about power. It is a story about patience. Stephen Curry grew up in gyms, but he was never meant to belong to them. His father, Del Curry, was a professional shooter, and the sound of basketballs bouncing was as familiar as breathing. Stephen watched from the sidelines, small and quiet, absorbing everything. He learned early that the game was not about strength alone. It was about rhythm, timing, and trust. He was smaller than everyone else, slower than everyone else, easier to overlook than anyone else. And so he practiced, not loudly, not dramatically, just constantly. In empty gyms, he shot until his arms tired, then shot again. He learned how to release the ball quickly, how to use space instead of muscle, how to make motion feel effortless. Every miss taught him something. Every make reinforced patience. In high school, recruiters looked past him. Too small, they said. Too weak. Not ready. Stephen heard it all and kept shooting anyway. He stayed after practice, repeating the same movement until it felt like breath. His hands learned the ball. His feet learned the floor. His eyes learned the arc. The world did not notice, but the work was happening. When he finally earned a chance at Davidson College, it was not because someone believed in him. It was because he refused to stop believing in himself. Davidson was quiet, small, easy to ignore. Stephen fit perfectly. He trained in silence, shot in rhythm, and learned how to stay calm when pressure arrived. And when the tournament came, when the lights turned on and the world finally looked his way, he did not change. He simply kept shooting. The shots fell. The rhythm held. The noise grew. But inside, Stephen was still the same boy in the empty gym, repeating the same motion, trusting the same breath, waiting for the ball to leave his hands exactly the way it always had. He did not know it yet, but this patience would one day change the game forever. Stephen Curry's rise did not feel like a climb. It felt like repetition. At Davidson, the days passed quietly, measured not by headlines, but by hours in the gym. Stephen arrived early, long before anyone asked him to. He shot in silence, listening to the echo of the ball and the soft whisper of the net. Each shot was the same, and that sameness was comforting. It told him he was exactly where he needed to be. The world still did not expect much. Davidson was small. Stephen was smaller. The stage was supposed to be too big for him. But when games began, the rhythm took over. Stephen moved without rushing, gliding from spot to spot, letting the ball find him instead of chasing it. He shot from deep, not to show range, but to stay in rhythm. Long shots felt easier to him than close ones. They gave him space to breathe. In the tournament, everything slowed. Crowds roared, lights burned, pressure pressed in. Stephen stayed calm. Each game became another empty gym in his mind. Each possession became a single shot, nothing more. He did not think about outcomes. He thought about release, about balance, about following through and letting the ball fly. And the ball kept flying in. Davidson kept winning. The world started to notice, then to wonder, then to stare. Commentators spoke louder. Cameras followed him longer. But Stephen remained steady, eyes soft, breath even, the same boy who had been overlooked now quietly rewriting expectations. When the run finally ended, there was no sadness, only understanding. The work had worked. Stephen packed his bag and left Davidson the same way he had arrived, quietly, with gratitude, carrying the rhythm with him. He knew the next level would be harder, louder, faster. He also knew that nothing there could take away what he had built in silence. The quiet rise was over, but the quiet work was not. The NBA was louder than Stephen Curry expected. Not just the arenas, but everything around them. Cameras followed him. Opinions moved faster than passes. Every mistake echoed longer. Every success was measured, compared, questioned. Stephen noticed it all, then did what he had always done. He went back to the gym. Golden State was not a place of calm when he arrived. The franchise carried years of losing, of restlessness, of searching for something to believe in. Stephen stepped into that noise quietly, his body still light, his mind still steady, his rhythm unchanged. His rookie season felt like learning how to breathe in wind. The game was faster. Defenders were stronger. Mistakes were punished immediately. Stephen missed shots he usually made. He turned the ball over. He was pushed, bumped, tested. The world questioned whether his game would translate. Stephen listened without reacting and returned to repetition. He shot before practice. He shot after practice. He shot alone, in silence. But the body began to whisper. His ankles hurt. At first, it was small. Tightness. A slight hesitation. Then pain that returned again and again, like a reminder that the body had limits the mind did not want to accept. Stephen sat out games, and more games. Doctors spoke. Doubt crept in around the edges. The noise grew louder. Too fragile, they said. Too small, they said. Not built for this, they said. Stephen did not argue. He rehabbed. He learned to strengthen what had been ignored. He rebuilt his balance, his base, his relationship with the ground. Every movement became intentional. Every step mattered. He learned patience in a new way. Not the patience of waiting for opportunity, but the patience of waiting for the body to heal. The gym became his refuge again. Slow drills, careful steps. Hundreds of shots, taken with new awareness. When he returned, he was different. Not faster, not stronger. Just steadier. The floor felt more solid beneath him. The rhythm returned, deeper than before. He began to shoot again, calmly, confidently, without forcing anything. The world noticed the makes. Stephen noticed the balance. And balance, he knew, was everything. Trust is something the body earns slowly. Stephen Curry learned this during long hours of rehab, when progress was measured not in shots made, but in steps taken without pain. He moved carefully now, listening to the floor beneath his feet, feeling the way weight shifted, how balance lived in the smallest adjustments. There were no crowds during this time. No cameras, no noise, no praise, just quiet work. Stephen rebuilt his ankles the same way he had rebuilt his shot, with patience, repetition, and belief. Every exercise was done slowly, deliberately, teaching the body how to move without fear. He learned how to land softly, how to push gently, how to trust again. When he returned to the court fully, something had changed. Not in his shooting, in his movement. He floated now, lighter than before, smoother, more connected. His feet moved with intention instead of urgency. The game felt like it was opening for him again, and he moved through it like water finding its path. Golden State began to feel different too. The teens started to believe in something they could not quite name. When Stephen was on the floor, the spacing improved. The ball moved. The chaos softened. The gym felt calmer, even when the crowd was loud. And then the shots started falling again. Not forced, not rushed, just natural. Deep shots, quick releases. High arcs that kissed the air before finding the net. Stephen smiled more now, not because of the makes, but because the rhythm had returned. The work was speaking again, and the body was listening. At night, he lay still, feeling his ankles settle, feeling the body slowly accept the trust he was giving it. He had learned something important in the silence of rehab. That patience was not passive. It was active, living, working even when nothing seemed to move. The season ended, and something new waited quietly on the horizon. Stephen did not rush toward it. He simply kept showing up, kept shooting, kept breathing. The body trusted him now. And soon the world would too. There is a moment when repetition turns into something else. Stephen Curry felt it one night in an empty gym, long after practice had ended. The lights were dim. The floor was quiet. The ball left his hands again and again, each release identical, each arc familiar. And suddenly, without effort, the rhythm locked in completely. He was no longer thinking. He was flowing. The next season began, and the rhythm followed him onto the court. Shots came faster. Releases grew quicker. Space became something he created with movement, not strength. Defenders rushed. Stephen waited. Defenders hesitated. Stephen shot. It looked effortless. It was not. It was thousands of hours made invisible. The league did not know what to do with him yet. They chased him with bigger defenders. They pressured him at half court. They tried to knock him off rhythm with physicality and noise. Stephen adjusted without changing who he was. He ran more. He moved faster. He shot earlier, and the rhythm stayed. Golden State began to change around him. The offense opened like a window. The floor stretched. The game felt lighter, freer, almost playful. Teammates moved with more joy. Fans leaned forward in their seats, sensing something new forming. Stephen still went home quietly after games. He iced his ankles. He stretched slowly. He rested deeply. The noise grew, but he did not chase it. He returned to the gym the next morning and repeated the same motion again and again, grounding himself in the familiar. Then something shifted. Games that used to feel close began to open. Leads grew faster. Defenders arrived too late. Shots fell from places no one had dared to shoot before. Stephen did not celebrate much. He simply turned and ran back, breath steady, eyes soft, trusting the work to speak. The rhythm was no longer just rhythm. It was a weapon. And the league could feel it. The league began to change quietly at first. Not because anyone announced it, not because anyone planned it, but because the game itself had to adjust to the rhythm Stephen Curry was creating. Defenders stood farther out. Coaches rewrote playbooks. Entire systems shifted just to account for the way he moved, the way he shot, the way he refused to play by old distances. Stephen noticed the changes and kept shooting anyway. He woke early and practiced before the world stirred. The gym was still his sanctuary, the one place where noise could not reach him. He repeated the same motion, knees bend, eyes lift, wrists soft, over and over, until the body no longer needed instructions. On the court, the effect was unmistakable. Defenders chased him everywhere, even when he didn't have the ball. The floor stretched wider. Space appeared where it had never existed before. Teammates found lanes that felt like gifts, openings created by the gravity of his presence. Stephen didn't force anything. He trusted the bend. The game leaned toward him, and he leaned back just enough to stay balanced. When pressure came, he passed. When space appeared, he shot. When chaos rose, he moved calmly through it, the way he always had. There were nights when everything fell, shot after shot, crowds rising and falling. The net whispering again and again. Stephen stayed the same. He turned, ran back, breathed, waited for the next possession. The discipline of silence still lived in him, even as arenas erupted around him. Inside, he was still in an empty gym, still a boy shooting alone, still repeating the same motion until it felt like breath. But the league could feel the shift now. Young players watched him and began to shoot from farther away. Coaches gave permission that had never been given before. The game started to stretch outward, opening new spaces, new possibilities, new ideas of what was allowed. Stephen had not tried to change anything. He had simply trusted repetition long enough for the world to follow. At night, after the noise faded, he lay still and felt the day leave his body. His ankles held. His breath was steady. His mind was quiet. He knew the work was working, not because of praise, but because the game itself was responding. The bend had begun. And once the game bends, it never returns to its old shape. Stephen closed his eyes and rested, knowing that the rhythm he had built in silence was now carrying something much bigger than himself, A new way to move a new way, to shoot a new way, to breathe inside the game. The night stayed calm. The work continued, and the bend became permanent. Belief moves quietly at first. It does not announce itself. It does not rush. It simply passes from one person to the next, like a steady warmth in the room. Stephen Curry felt it spreading through the team before anyone spoke about it. In practice, passes came faster. In games, movement flowed more easily. On the bench, doubt was replaced with calm. Golden State began to play differently, lighter, freer, unafraid. The ball moved without hesitation. Players cut without waiting. Shots were taken without fear of missing. The rhythm Stephen carried had become the rhythm of the entire floor. And when belief spreads, everything changes. The crowd felt it too. The arena buzzed with something new, not noise, but anticipation. People leaned forward before shots even left Stephen's hands, already sensing the arc, already trusting the result. The ball rose, the net whispered, and the belief grew stronger. Stephen did not celebrate it. He returned to his routine, morning workouts, slow stretches, quiet shots before anyone arrived. He knew belief was fragile. It needed to be protected with consistency. So he repeated the same movements, the same habits, the same care he had always given the game. Every day was treated the same, whether it followed a loss or a win, whether the crowd roared or stayed silent. The season began to feel different. Games that once felt heavy now felt light. The pressure that once weighed on possessions had softened. Stephen played with joy, but not recklessness. The joy came from trust. Trust in the work, in the body, in the rhythm that never left him. Opponents tried everything. They trapped him early. They switched defenders. They fouled harder. Stephen adapted without anger. He moved more. He passed earlier. He shot from deeper places, spaces no one had dared to guard before. And the game continued to bend around him, opening lanes that did not exist before. At night, when the noise faded, Stephen lay still and listened to his breath slow. He felt the calm settle, the same calm he had learned in empty gyms and long rehab sessions. The world was louder now, but inside, nothing had changed. He knew something important. Belief was not something he had created. It was something he had practiced into existence. And now that belief had spread, through teammates, through fans, through the game itself, it could not be taken away. It had become part of the rhythm, part of the air, part of the way basketball moved. Stephen closed his eyes and rested, trusting the same thing he always had, that if he showed up again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, the rhythm would be waiting for him, and so would belief. As the seasons passed, Stephen Curry's life began to widen beyond the court, not suddenly, not loudly, but steadily, the same way everything meaningful had always happened for him. People still spoke about his shooting, the range, the release, the impossibility of it all. But Stephen knew the truth. Shooting had only been the doorway. What he was becoming now was something larger. A leader, a father, a husband, a center of calm in a world that was growing faster every year. Off the court, life slowed him in good ways. He married Aisha, his high school sweetheart, the one who had known him before arenas, before chance, before expectations. With her, he found a rhythm that had nothing to do with basketball. Meals at home, laughter, ordinary evenings that felt sacred after years of hotels and flights. When children arrived, the world changed shape again. Time became more valuable. Silence became deeper. Purpose became clearer. Stephen carried this new steadiness with him back to the game. He was no longer just playing for himself. He was playing for the life he was building. The Warriors grew alongside him. Draymond's fire, Clay's calm, the shared trust that formed between them. It all balanced in a way Stephen recognized instantly. This was family rhythm, not just team rhythm. They learned each other's movements without speaking. They felt the floor together. They trusted the moment to arrive. In 2015, when the first championship finally came, it felt like a release. Not joy exploding, but calm settling. Stephen held the trophy and thought not about the noise, but about the quiet gyms, the missed shots, the night's icing ankles, the doubts he had carried silently. The ring felt light in his hands, because the weight had already been carried long ago. But life does not pause for success. And next season, he returned to work the same way. Early mornings, careful stretches, quiet repetition. And something extraordinary happened. The rhythm deepened, the confidence widened. The game began to feel limitless. That year, he shot like someone completely at peace. Shots fell from places no one guarded. The ball moved as if it was alive. The game bent further and further outward. He broke records without chasing them. He changed the league without trying to. But with success came new pressure. He learned to live with attention, to protect his family from it, to stay rooted when the world pulled at him. Stephen prayed more. He rested more. He listened more. He understood now that greatness was not about moments, but about carrying yourself the same way through all of them. Wins, losses, injuries, championships, they were all part of the same breath. And as the years passed, as titles were won and lost, as bodies aged and roles shifted, Stephen Curry stayed steady, not because he was untouched by life, but because he had learned how to move with it. The boy who kept shooting had become a man who kept believing, and that belief would carry him through everything that was still to come. Life has a way of testing belief right after it proves it. For Stephen Curry, the fall came quietly, the same way everything else had, not with drama, but with disruption. After championships and records, after seasons that felt effortless, the rhythm broke again. Injuries returned. Teammates left. The noise grew louder. The court felt emptier. The dynasty cracked. Kevin Durant moved on. Klay Thompson's body gave way. Draymond carried weight in silence. And suddenly, Stephen was alone again, not in a gym this time, but in responsibility. The team that once flowed effortlessly now struggled to breathe. Losses piled up. Nights grew long. The world asked if the magic was gone. Stephen listened. And then he went back to work. He trained through pain, through uncertainty, through seasons that offered no reward except the chance to keep going. He woke early. He stretched carefully. He shot slowly. The rhythm did not care about standings. It only cared about repetition. Off the court, he leaned deeper into family. He cooked dinner. He read bedtime stories. He lived inside ordinary moments. These moments steadied him more than any win ever had. They reminded him that basketball was part of life, not the whole of it. When he returned to the gym, he carried that calm with him, letting it protect him from the noise. Then, when the world had stopped expecting anything, the body healed. The shots returned. The joy returned. The rhythm returned. Stephen stepped back onto the court, not to prove anything, but to complete something. He played freely again, smiling, moving, breathing. The game felt like play, not pressure. And when the championship came again, years later, it felt different. Not like a surprise, like confirmation. He had fallen. He had waited. He had stood again. And through it all, belief had never left him. It had simply learned how to rest until it was needed again. Stephen Curry finished that season standing calmly in the middle of the floor, surrounded by noise, but untouched by it. The boy who kept shooting was still there. He had just learned how to keep going. As the years passed, Stephen Curry began to feel time differently, not as something chasing him, but as something moving alongside him. He was no longer the young player proving he belonged. He was no longer the star changing the game. He was now the center of a long story, standing calmly between what had been and what was still unfolding. The body required more care now. Warm-ups lasted longer. recovery mattered more. Stephen listened without complaint. He had learned that longevity was its own form of success. Every day he could step onto the court, feel the ball in his hands, and trust his movement was a gift. He played smarter now. He moved less, but better. He shot earlier, not harder. He passed more, trusting the game to come back to him. Younger players watched him closely, the same way he had once watched his father. They studied his footwork, his balance, his calm. Stephen noticed and smiled quietly. He did not need to teach loudly. The rhythm taught for him. Off the court, his life was fuller than ever. His children grew. His home grew warmer. His purpose grew deeper. He learned how to leave basketball at the gym and return to family without carrying the noise with him. That separation became sacred. It allowed him to stay light on the court, free from weight that did not belong there. Stephen also began to speak more openly now, not about records or wins, but about patience, faith, and the long view. He talked about the years of being overlooked, about rehab, about trusting the process when nothing seemed to move. His words were calm, measured, not meant to impress. They were meant to steady. In games, when moments tightened, when crowds held their breath, Stephen felt something new. Not excitement, not fear, but peace. He had been here before, in many forms. He had learned how to wait for the right moment without forcing it. And when he shot, the ball still rose the same way. Soft, high, true. Time had not taken that away. It had refined it. He was not chasing history anymore. He was living inside it. And as the seasons continued, Stephen Curry remained exactly where he was meant to be. Not at the beginning, not at the end, but in the middle, steady and calm, letting the game move through him the same way breath moved through his body. There comes a moment in every long career when the story stops being about talent and becomes about responsibility. For Stephen Curry, that moment arrived quietly, the way all important moments did in his life. He felt it not in a press conference or a trophy ceremony, but in the locker room after a loss, when the noise outside faded and the team sat in silence, waiting for something to settle. The Warriors were young again, new faces, new energy, new mistakes. And Stephen was no longer just the shooter, or the spark, or the surprise. He was the anchor. He carried the franchise now, not with volume, but with consistency. He arrived early, the same as always, letting younger players see what preparation looked like when it was done without ego. He spoke when needed, but mostly he showed how to take losses without panic, how to take wins without pride, how to return to work no matter what the record said. There were nights when Stephen scored 40, and nights when he barely scored at all. The numbers mattered less than the example. The team watched how he moved after mistakes, how he treated officials, how he stayed calm when the game slipped away. That calm became a lesson. In 2021, he carried the team almost alone. The shots were harder. The defense was heavier. The margin was thinner. And still, he played with joy. He scored at will, not because it was easy, but because he had learned how to survive difficulty without losing himself. The season ended without a title, but Stephen felt something subtle inside him. He had proven something deeper than dominance. He could lead without control. He could carry without force. He could stay himself when everything changed. The league watched in awe as he passed legends on scoring lists, broke records again, and smiled through it all. Stephen did not chase the moments. He let them come to him, the same way he always had. Then came 2022. The Warriors were back, not because they were loud, not because they were feared, but because they were patient. Stephen played with balance and clarity, letting the game unfold instead of pushing it forward. And when the finals arrived, he carried the weight with ease. He played not to prove he was great. He played to finish the story properly. And when he lifted the trophy again, when the noise reached its peak, Stephen closed his eyes for a moment and breathed. He thought of empty gyms, of missed shots, of quiet mornings when no one believed. The career had come full circle. And Stephen Curry was still standing, calm, steady, complete. After 2022, Stephen Curry felt the story shift again. Not forward, not backward, but inward. The championship had closed a circle that had taken more than a decade to draw. He had proven what he needed to prove, not to the world, but to himself. And once that weight lifted, something lighter replaced it. Freedom. Stephen noticed it in the way he played the next season. There was no tension in his shoulders, no urgency in his movement. He smiled more, laughed more, spoke less. The game felt like it had returned to its original shape, something to enjoy, something to explore, something to share. He was no longer chasing history. He was carrying it. Younger players watched him differently now, not with expectation, but with reverence. They saw the calm behind the greatness, the way he treated trainers, the way he listened in film sessions, the way he accepted bad nights without emotion. Stephen had become a living lesson in longevity, and he took that role seriously, even when he didn't speak about it. His body, though, reminded him of time. Recovery days increased. Warm-ups grew longer. Rest became part of the work. Stephen adapted the same way he always had. He adjusted training to protect his joints, his ankles, his back. He shot less in practice and more in rhythm. He trusted memory over repetition, knowing the work had already been done. There were nights when the shots did not fall, and that was okay. Stephen learned how to measure success differently now, by effort, by presence, by the way the team stayed together, even when the scoreboard did not reward them. He had seen both sides of greatness, and he knew that the quiet years mattered just as much as the loud ones. Off the court, life felt fuller than ever. His children grew older. His home grew louder with laughter. His world grew wider beyond basketball. He invested in education, in community, in projects that would last beyond his playing days. He understood that legacy was not something you left behind. It was something you built alongside your work, slowly, patiently, with care. Stephen still loved the gym. He still arrived early. He still stayed late. He still shot in silence when no one was watching. But now, he did it not to prove anything, only to stay connected to the rhythm that had carried him this far. The career had entered its final chapters, and Stephen Curry read them calmly, one page at a time, knowing he had already written the most important parts in empty gyms, in rehab rooms, in quiet mornings where belief had been his only companion. And as he lay down each night, breathing slowly, letting the day settle, he knew something deeply. The story was no longer about becoming. It was about being. And being, for Stephen Curry, had always been enough. By the time Stephen Curry entered the middle of his career, the world thought it already knew his story. The shooter, the record breaker, the man who changed the game. But the truth was quieter and deeper. These were the years that truly defined him, not because of what he did, but because of how he endured. After the first championships, after the record seasons, after the noise had peaked, life asked Stephen to prove something different. It asked him to stay, to keep showing up when the thrill faded, to lead when winning was no longer easy, to believe when belief was no longer popular. The Warriors changed quickly. Championship teammates left. Injuries took seasons away. The roster filled with young players who did not yet know how to win. And suddenly, Stephen was no longer the spark. He was the foundation. He arrived at practice earlier than everyone else, the same way he always had. Not to make a point, but because it was who he was. He warmed up slowly, deliberately, feeling the body wake, respecting its limits. He stayed after practice, working on footwork, balance, rhythm, the same things he had practiced as a teenager in empty gyms. Losses came often in those years. The arena felt quieter. The crowd left earlier. The questions grew louder. Is the dynasty over? Is Curry still enough? Is the magic gone? Stephen heard the questions and let them pass. He had learned something important long ago. Noise never changed the work. He carried the team not by forcing greatness, but by modeling steadiness. He encouraged young players with patience. He corrected mistakes without anger. He celebrated effort more than results. Slowly, the team learned to breathe again. During the 2020 to 2021 season, Stephen played some of the best basketball of his life, not because the team was dominant, but because he was free. He shot with joy, with courage, with the same childlike belief that had carried him from high school gyms to NBA arenas. He scored at will, night after night, not to prove anything, but to honor the work that had never left him. When the season ended without a title, Stephen did not feel empty. He felt ready. Ready for the final chapter. Ready for the moment when everything would come together one last time. Ready to finish the story the right way, with patience, with calm, with trust. Those years of struggle were not detours. They were preparation. They reminded him who he was without the noise, without the spotlight, without the safety of winning. And when the time came to rise again, Stephen would rise not as a surprise, but as a man who had never stopped doing the work. The years that defined him were not the loudest. They were the quietest. And they were the reason the ending would mean everything. The return did not feel like a comeback. It felt like a continuation. Stephen Curry entered the 2021 to 2022 season with a calm that surprised even himself. There was no urgency in his movement, no desperation in his preparation. He had already carried a broken team. He had already answered doubt with work. Now, something different was happening around him. The pieces were finally falling back into place. Klay Thompson returned, not fully at first, not easily, but steadily. Stephen watched him with quiet pride, remembering his own long months of rehab, the lonely mornings, the slow rebuilding of trust. He never rushed Klay. He never pushed him. He simply stayed beside him, letting presence do the teaching. The team felt whole again. Not dominant, not loud, just balanced. Stephen's role changed once more. He no longer needed to carry everything. He could flow again, move again, trust again. The shots still came, but now they came within rhythm instead of rescue. He played with patience, letting the game arrive instead of chasing it. As the season progressed, something special grew. The defense tightened, the bench believed. The noise turned into focus. Stephen felt it in practices, the way drills ended with energy instead of exhaustion. He felt it in games, the way teammates moved without hesitation. He felt it in himself, the way his body responded, not with pain, but with cooperation. When the playoffs arrived, Stephen accepted a new role without hesitation. He came off the bench, not because he had to, but because it was right. The choice stunned the world. A superstar stepping back, choosing patience over pride, team over ego. Stephen never explained it. He didn't need to. The decision came from the same place everything else had, rhythm. And the rhythm held. He entered games calmly, changed them quietly, and left them balanced again. When the finals arrived, when the lights burned brightest, he stepped forward without fear. The series tested everything, his patience, his body, his belief. Game after game, he carried the team with calm intensity, shooting through pressure, moving through defense, breathing through moments that once would have overwhelmed him. And when the final buzzer sounded, when the title was secured, Stephen felt something release deep inside his chest. Not joy exploding, completion settling. He had returned to the top not to prove anything, but to close the circle he had opened years earlier in empty gyms, shooting alone, trusting a rhythm no one else could see. As he held the finals MVP trophy, Stephen closed his eyes briefly and breathed. The work was finished. The story was whole. And he had become exactly what the journey had been shaping all along. Not just a shooter, Not just a champion, but a steady presence that could endure change, loss, doubt, and still rise without noise. After the return to the top, Stephen Curry felt something shift inside him, not relief. Not pride, understanding. The championship had closed the loop, but it had also opened space to reflect on what the work had truly meant all along. For the first time in his career, Stephen was no longer chasing or rebuilding. He was simply continuing, and that continuation felt lighter than anything he had known before. The season that followed was different. He played with ease. He smiled more. He rested without guilt. Stephen no longer measured success by trophies or records. He measured it by mornings when his body felt ready, by practices where the rhythm flowed, by games where the team moved as one. The pressure that once followed him everywhere had softened into something gentle, a reminder, not a demand. He became more patient with the game. When shots didn't fall, he didn't rush. When losses came, he didn't panic. When the noise returned, he didn't react. He had learned that work, when done long enough, becomes something permanent. It stays even when the results change. The hours in the gym, the rehab, the doubt, the belief, the waiting, none of it had been wasted. It had shaped not just a player, but a way of living. Off the court, Stephen leaned fully into family life. His children grew older, more curious, more independent. He attended games and school events the same way he attended practices, present, calm, unhurried. He cooked with Aisha, laughed more freely, let evenings stretch without planning them. These moments grounded him in a way basketball never could on its own. He also began to speak more openly about his journey, not to teach, not to preach, but to share. He spoke about being overlooked, about injury, about the long seasons when belief was something he had to carry alone. He spoke about faith, patience, and trusting the process when nothing seemed to move. And people listened, not because he was loud, but because his life had proven the words. Stephen understood now that the work had never been about making shots. It had been about learning how to return. Return to calm, return to rhythm, return to self. Every phase of his career, the rise, the fall, the rebuilding, the return, had been practice for this stage where effort and identity no longer fought each other. He could play freely because he no longer needed the game to define him. At night, when the house finally grew quiet, Stephen lay still and listened to his breath slow. He felt gratitude settle in his chest for the pain, the doubt, the patience, the joy. It all belonged to him now, equally. The work was still there, but now it worked for him too. Stephen Curry entered this season differently than all the ones before it. There was no goal written in the margins of his mind, no number to chase, no narrative to fulfill. He arrived simply to be present. The gym still smelled the same. The floor still echoed the same way when the ball hit it. But Stephen noticed things he had once rushed past. The way light fell through the windows during warm-ups, the way the ball sounded different when the building was empty, the way his breath naturally slowed when he stopped trying to control it. This was the season of presence. In practice, he moved carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect. He had learned that presence required attention to the body, to the moment, to the people around him. He took breaks when he needed them. He listened when something felt off. He trusted the work he had already done. In games, the difference was clear. Stephen no longer forced himself into moments. He allowed moments to find him. Some nights he scored 20 quietly. Some nights he exploded without warning. Some nights he passed more than he shot. All of it felt right. He played like a man who had finally stopped asking the game for permission. The younger players watched closely. They saw the calm in his movement, the patience in his decisions, the way he smiled even after missed shots. Stephen had become a teacher again, not by instruction, but by example, showing that presence was more powerful than urgency. Away from the court, life felt full and steady. He spent mornings walking slowly, sometimes without music, sometimes without destination. He listened to his children talk about things that had nothing to do with basketball. He cooked meals without checking the time. He sat with Aisha in silence, letting the day fade without needing to fill it. These moments mattered more than any stat line. Stephen also reflected more now, not with nostalgia, but with clarity. He saw how every phase of his career had prepared him for this one. The early doubt had taught patience. The injuries had taught humility. The championships had taught balance. The losses had taught endurance. Nothing had been wasted. At night, he lay still and felt the body settle, heavy and warm, the same way it had after long practices years ago. His breath slowed naturally, without effort. Sleep came easily, deeper than it ever had when his mind was full of tomorrow. Stephen understood something important now. Presence was not a skill you learned early. It was something you earned by staying long enough. And as he moved through this season, calm, steady, unhurried, he knew he was no longer just playing basketball. He was living inside it, fully, gently, exactly where he was meant to be. As Stephen Curry moved deeper into the later chapters of his career, leadership became something he practiced without thinking about it. It was no longer a role. It was a presence. The locker room felt different now. The voices were younger, louder, more uncertain. Stephen noticed how quickly energy shifted, how easily doubt could spread, how fragile belief could be in a league that moved at constant speed. He did not try to control it. He steadied it. He arrived early and left calmly. He treated trainers with the same respect he gave coaches. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, it was quiet, measured, always aimed at easing tension rather than creating it. Young players came to him in small moments, after practice, before flights, late at night, when doubt felt loud. Stephen answered without lectures. He told them stories of being overlooked, of being injured, of seasons when winning disappeared. He reminded them that nothing lasting came quickly, that patience was not weakness, that rhythm was something you built when no one was watching. On the court, his leadership showed in subtle ways. He took defensive assignments no one noticed. He set screens that freed others. He passed when shots were there. These choices taught more than any speech ever could. Stephen felt the years in his body, but he did not fight them. He adjusted his training, shortened practices, extended recovery. He understood now that leadership meant staying available, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, rhythmically. He also began to prepare quietly for life after basketball, not by stepping away, by expanding. He invested time in projects that mattered to him: education, community, opportunity for others who were once overlooked like he was. He spoke about using influence carefully, about carrying success gently, about remembering who you were before the noise arrived. At home, he became more present than ever. He watched his children grow without rushing them. He protected family time fiercely. He created space for rest, knowing that rest was not a luxury, it was a responsibility. And in all of this, Stephen felt a calm settle into place. He was no longer becoming something. He was being. The league still changed around him. Styles shifted. Stars rose and fell. Trends came and went. But Stephen remained steady, a quiet constant, moving through the game like breath through the body, unseen, essential, lasting. These were the quiet leadership years. They would not be the loudest. They would not be the most celebrated. But they would be the ones that mattered most. Letting go did not arrive all at once. It arrived in moments, small, gentle moments that whispered instead of shouted. Stephen Curry noticed them when recovery took longer than it used to, when the body asked for rest instead of reps, when he finished a game and felt gratitude instead of hunger. The game was still there, but the grip had softened. Stephen had learned, over many years, that nothing ended suddenly if you listened closely. Endings announced themselves slowly, through changes in desire, in rhythm, and how the heart responded. He listened now, carefully, respectfully, without fear. He began to play with even more intention. Every possession mattered, not because it might be the last, but because it was this one. He smiled more during games, laughed with teammates, took moments to breathe in the arena instead of rushing to the next play. The court felt sacred in a new way, not as a stage, but as a place of gratitude. The younger players did not notice it first, but they felt it. They felt the patience in his movement. They felt the calm in his voice. They felt the way he stayed steady when chaos arrived. Stephen was teaching them how to end well, even if they didn't know it yet. Off the court, he prepared quietly for the next season of life. He spent more time at home. He planned less. He rested more deeply. He thought about mornings without practice, evenings without games, weeks shaped by choice instead of schedule. The thought did not scare him. It brought peace. He knew the rhythm would remain. It had always lived inside him, not in the game. When people asked how much longer he would play, Stephen smiled and answered gently, "I'm just enjoying today." And that was true. He had learned that letting go did not mean leaving. It meant loosening the need to prove, loosening the grip on outcomes, loosening the identity that once needed the game to exist. Stephen Curry was becoming something new again, not by force, not by decision, but by patience. The same patience that had carried him from being overlooked to being unforgettable now carried him toward whatever came next. At night, he lay still and listened to his breath slow, feeling the body release the day. There was no sadness there, only peace. The game had given him everything, and now it was teaching him how to rest. As the years stretched gently forward, Stephen Curry realized that the game was still teaching him, just not in the way it once had. The lessons were quieter now. They lived in moments between plays, in conversations with teammates, in the long walks from locker room to bus after late games. These were the spaces where understanding settled, where the noise fell away and meaning remained. Stephen noticed how differently he listened now. He listened to the body, not pushing when it asked for rest. He listened to the team, sensing when they needed calm instead of energy. He listened to himself, noticing when joy arrived and when it drifted. These lessons were not about winning. They were about timing. There were nights when Stephen could feel it before the game even started. The body heavy, the breath slow, the rhythm quieter. On those nights, he played differently. He passed more. He moved less. He let others lead. And in doing so, he taught something that could not be taught with words. That leadership changed shape. It became invisible. Younger players grew in those moments, stepping forward without being asked, learning confidence because space had been given to them. Stephen watched with pride, not because they succeeded, but because they were learning how to carry responsibility. Off the court, the lessons continued. His children asked questions that had nothing to do with basketball. His home asked for presence, not performance. His life asked for balance. Stephen answered by slowing down. He read more. He sat longer. He planned less. He realized that the same discipline that had once fueled his rise could also be used to protect his peace. The work was still there. It had just changed direction. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the boy he had been, small, overlooked, shooting alone in empty gyms. He smiled at the thought, grateful for the patience that boy had carried without knowing it would matter. Because patience, he knew now, was the greatest lesson the game ever taught him. It had taught him how to wait, how to return, how to endure, how to release. And as the final lessons arrived, one by one, Stephen accepted them without resistance. He was ready. Not for an ending. There comes a moment when effort is no longer taken. It is returned. Stephen Curry felt that moment arrive slowly, over many seasons, until one day he realized The game was giving back everything he had poured into it, not in trophies or applause, but in peace. The court felt lighter now, not because the work was easier, but because he no longer carried weight that didn't belong to him. He moved freely, without expectation. Each game was a gift instead of a test. Each possession was something to experience instead of something to win. The pressure that once pressed against his chest had dissolved into gratitude. Stephen had become something rare, a player who could enjoy the game again, the way he had when he was a child. He smiled during warm-ups, laughing with teammates, feeling the simple joy of the ball in his hands. He took deep breaths before tip-off, not to prepare, but to appreciate. He knew these moments were numbered, and that knowledge made them sacred. The game responded. Shots fell easily on some nights, stubbornly refused on others. Stephen accepted both with the same calm. He had learned that the game always gave back what you gave it, and he had given it patience, trust, and time. The crowd still roared, but Stephen heard something deeper, the sound of the floor, the rhythm of footsteps, the soft whisper of the net. These sounds had been with him from the beginning. They had never left. After games, he sat quietly at his locker, unlacing his shoes slowly, feeling the body release. He took his time now. There was no rush to leave the moment behind. He let it finish fully before moving on. Off the court, his life felt rich and full. Family dinners lasted longer. Conversations went deeper. Days felt wider. He understood that basketball had taught him how to live, not just how to compete. It had taught him patience, humility, attention, rhythm. And now, those lessons filled his days, even when the ball was not in his hands. Stephen Curry was no longer chasing the game. He was walking beside it. And in that space, where effort ended and understanding began, the game finally gave back everything it had ever taken. Goodbyes rarely arrive as moments. They arrive as seasons. Stephen Curry felt the goodbye forming long before it ever needed to be spoken. It lived in the way he lingered a little longer on the court, after games, in the way he looked around the arena when the crowd began to leave in the way he breathed in the quiet after the noise faded. Nothing was announced. Nothing was decided, but something was changing. He noticed how deeply he appreciated small things now. The bounce of the ball during warm-ups, the laughter in the locker room, the way the lights dimmed when the game ended. These moments felt heavier with meaning, not sadness, just awareness. Stephen began to say thank you more often. To trainers, to teammates, to staff members who had traveled every mile with him. Not because the end was near, but because gratitude had become his language. The younger players sensed it too. They played harder when he was on the floor, sharper, more focused, as if they knew they were part of something closing. Stephen never said anything to them about it. He let the feeling exist on its own, the way all true endings do. At home, he found himself reflecting more often. He remembered the boy at Davidson, the rehab rooms, the nights of doubt, the championships that once felt impossible. And instead of nostalgia, he felt peace. The story had been complete long before it would ever be finished. In games, Stephen played with a kind of softness now, not weakness, but care. He protected his body, chose his moments, conserved his energy. He had learned that endings were not something to fear, but something to shape gently. There were nights when he sat on the bench longer than usual, watching the game move without him. He smiled during those moments, knowing the game was bigger than any one person, that it would continue long after he stepped away. That knowledge did not hurt. It freed him. Stephen Curry was learning how to say goodbye without saying it out loud, by being present, by being grateful, by letting go slowly, one moment at a time. And as the seasons moved on, he carried this quiet goodbye with him, not like a burden, but like a soft closing door, one that made no sound, one that left the room exactly as it had been, full of light, full of rhythm, full of calm. When the applause faded, something else remained. Stephen Curry noticed it in the silence after games, when the arena emptied and only the hum of lights remained. He sat longer now, shoes still on, jersey damp, letting the moment dissolve naturally. He had learned not to rush the end of anything, not possessions, not seasons, not chapters. The game no longer followed him home. That was new. In the past, every win and loss had lingered in his mind, replaying itself in sleep, echoing in the morning. Now, when he closed the door behind him, the noise stayed outside. Home had become a place of rest, not reflection. This was the gift the game had finally given back. Stephen spent more evenings doing nothing, not resting, not recovering, just being. He sat with his family, listening to stories that had nothing to do with basketball. He cooked without timing meals around practice. He let days unfold without structure. The freedom felt strange at first, then natural, like learning a new rhythm after years of repetition. When people asked about retirement, Stephen smiled gently. He did not answer with dates. He answered with presence. "I'm enjoying this," he would say. And he meant it, because enjoyment had returned, not the excitement of winning, but the peace of being finished with proving. The game had become a companion again, instead of a test. Each time he stepped on the court, he felt gratitude instead of pressure. The younger players played with more confidence now, as if his calm had spread to them. They knew he would be there, steady, reliable, unshaken. That knowledge made them braver. Stephen saw himself in them, the same way he once saw his father, the same way the rhythm passed forward. Late at night, when the house finally went quiet, Stephen lay still and felt his breath slow. The body rested easily now. The mind drifted without effort. There was no next goal waiting in the dark, only rest. After the applause, after the headlines, after the noise, this was what remained. A life that belonged to him again. A rhythm that did not need an audience. A calm that did not need to be earned. Stephen Curry closed his eyes and let the night take him gently, knowing that whatever came next would arrive in its own time. The game had given him everything, and now it was letting him go. Life beyond the court did not feel empty to Stephen Curry. It felt wide. The days opened in new ways now, no longer shaped by schedules, flights, or tip-off times. Morning light entered the house slowly, and Stephen greeted it without urgency. He still woke early, not out of habit, but because his body had learned to love quiet mornings. He walked, stretched, breathed, letting the day arrive fully before stepping into it. The court was no longer the center of his life. It was part of the foundation. Stephen began to see how much space the game had been holding open for everything else. Family, purpose, curiosity. Without the constant pull of competition, these things expanded naturally. He spent more time learning, reading, listening. He asked questions he had never had time to ask before. What did he want to build next? Who did he want to help? How did he want his days to feel? He answered slowly, the same way he had always done important work. He stayed close to the game, but differently now. He watched from a distance, offering guidance when asked, never forcing his presence. He visited practices quietly, stood at the edge of the floor, and left without being noticed. The rhythm was still there, but it no longer needed him to hold it. At home, his children grew taller, louder, more independent. Stephen learned to be present in ways he had once struggled with, listening without distraction, playing without checking the time, letting moments stretch without rushing them. These were the practices of a different life, but they felt familiar. They used the same muscles, patience, attention, rhythm. He and Aisha talked about the future often. Not plans, possibilities. They imagined a life where mornings were slow, evenings were long, and days were shaped by intention rather than obligation. Stephen realized that this was the same dream he had chased as a boy, only now it had nothing to do with basketball. The world still remembered him. Highlights played, Records stood. Stories were told. Stephen let them be. He had learned that memory belonged to others, but presence belonged to him. And presence was something he would never give away again. At night, when the house went quiet, he lay down and listened to his breath, steady and deep. The same breath that had carried him through pressure, through doubt, through joy, now carried him into rest. The life beyond the lines was calm. And for the first time, it was entirely his. When everything else fell away, calm remained. Stephen Curry felt it most clearly in the evenings, when the world slowed without being asked. The light softened, the noise thinned, and the day released itself naturally. He sat quietly, sometimes alone, sometimes with family, and let the stillness settle. This calm was not new. It had been with him since the beginning, hidden inside repetition, inside patience, inside the long hours no one ever saw. Now it had space to breathe. He noticed that his body still remembered the rhythm of the game. His feet placed themselves carefully on the floor. His hands moved with ease. His posture stayed balanced, even when there was nothing to balance against. Basketball had shaped him permanently, not as a player, but as a way of moving through life. Stephen walked more now, not for fitness, for feeling. He listened to the sound of his steps, the pace of his breath, the way the world met him without resistance. These walks reminded him of running through screens, of finding space without forcing it. The same skill, just a different floor. People still recognized him. They smiled. They nodded. They spoke with gratitude. Stephen returned it gently, never lingering, never hiding. He understood now that admiration was not something to carry. It was something to acknowledge and let pass, the way he had let both praise and criticism pass throughout his career. At home, life was simple. Meals were slow. Conversations were unplanned. Evenings were wide and quiet. He read books he had once set aside. He learned new things without needing to be good at them. He allowed himself to be a beginner again, to move without expectation, to fail without judgment. This freedom felt like the greatest reward of all. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the game, not with longing, with gratitude. It had given him discipline. It had given him patience. It had given him a way to listen to himself. And now it had given him this, the ability to rest fully inside a life that did not demand anything from him. When Stephen lay down to sleep, his breath slowed easily. The mind softened without effort. There was nothing to prepare for, nothing to chase, nothing to hold. Only the calm remained. And calm, he had learned, was the truest form of success. The rhythm is still here. It has always been here. Stephen Curry rests in the quiet, and the quiet rests in him. Breath moves slowly, gently, without effort, in and out, like the same rhythm that once carried him through empty gyms and loud arenas, through doubt and belief, through rise and fall and return. Nothing needs to be done now. If the mind drifts, let it drift. If the body softens, let it soften. If sleep has already come, let it deepen. The story does not need to end, because rhythm does not end. It simply continues, the bounce of the ball in an empty gym, the soft whisper of the net, the sound of footsteps moving through quiet halls. All of it loops gently, again and again, the same way breath loops, the same way rest loops, the same way calm loops. There is no rush. There is no next moment waiting to be reached. Only this one, breath in and out. The night holds you now, steady and kind. The world is safe. The work is done. The rhythm remains, carrying you forward without asking anything in return. And if the story begins again, it will feel the same. Calm, steady, endless, because the rhythm has never belonged to the game. It has always belonged to you. Rest now. The rhythm will keep going.